Well, as you can see, I wasn't planning on dealing to those ice bumps, but I saw that the one at this end in particular was actually causing the leather to break up. So I thought, no, I'm going to have to deal with that. So I took the leather off the back, got rid of those ice bumps, and that's the end of that. The other leather work, that was this piece. I got the leather glued back on and it looks pretty good now. I think you can certainly still see where the breaks in the leather were, and at the top corner there was a piece missing there, and you can see I've cut a patch in, and that looks a lot happier. I'm not going to go any further than that. I was not supposed to be dealing with cosmetic problems, and I had to deal with that because it wasn't really a cosmetic problem. The leather was going to come off if I hadn't fixed it, and so fixing that was just part of the job really. What can you do? You let me loose on a camera, I'll do what I want. So here's the camera body. Now this business, this shaft here, I wasn't going to do anything with that. I thought that turned well enough, but it does feel a little bit dry, so I'm going to remove those screws, take that apart, clean it and put it back together. So there's a little screw here, and it's pretty small. It's probably going to fall out anyway. We'll see if we can get by without it falling out. And there'll be one down in here too, which I can't get my screwdriver to engage in, or I could if I put it in the right place. Back that out. Needs to be backed out a little bit more than that perhaps. Okay, let's try and see if this shaft will slide up yet. What's it holding on? It's holding on that one. So I'll just back that screw out a bit more. Now we're in business. Okay, so slide the shaft up. There's our roller from the bottom. The little screw is still present. I'll put that carefully to one side. Slide this out. Here's our sprocket. The screw is still present. I'll put that carefully to one side. Then we have a spacer washer. And then we have the shaft itself. So these pieces now, I see that there's a washer underneath that gear at the top. That's a surprise, I wasn't expecting to see that. Okay, well I'll just put some synthetic grease on that shaft and put that back together now. So I'll put some under the top there, where that washer is, where it goes through the body casting. And in the bottom of the body casting there, where the hole is that it sits in, I'll run some in there too. And start sliding that back together. We've got our shaft, our spacer washer, the sprocket, now of course I've got to get the screw to line up with that hole there. It'll be entertaining, usually is. And a roller from the bottom here. I'll see if I can keep the holes in this shaft running straight up and down so I can see what I'm doing. I think it's there. Let me see if I can get this screw to run in. Yeah, it's found the hole. I can do that one up. The other one obviously is going to be in line with it, so it's somewhere there. And that found the hole too, so I'll We'll chalk that one up as a win. That went very smoothly, and now that moves nice and freely. That's good. It's probably what I should have done before, but I was being a bit optimistic. Never mind. Next, get the struts back into the body. Well, here are the struts all clean and ready to go back. There wasn't much wrong with them. I'm going to apply a bit of molybdenum paste to that shutter release shaft there, so that these components will move freely on there. Probably doesn't hurt to run some down that edge. Now here we had the guide screw, the screw that coupled to the shutter release of the camera. I'm going to run that in. I'll have to take it out again later, of course, to fit the shutter, but it'll stop that lever from flopping around and falling over the side and getting caught behind the struts mechanism. Here I'm just going to put some synthetic grease in the slots at the back of the struts, top and bottom. I'm not doing the front struts part because it'll only rub off on my fingers if I tried to do that. This shaft here is where the shutter release runs on, the release. So that's all clean. I've just put a wipe of molybdenum paste on there. And there's the return spring. Slide that down over there. Now my shutter release component here. This is the way it goes in. The short end goes down. I've got to get that on the post and then get the struts into place in the body. And the struts are held in with 4 screws. 4 screws, 2 of them are on top, they're flat. The heads of those screws are flat. 2 of them, they're what you call raised heads. The heads are lightly domed, very lightly domed. The raised head ones go inside the film cassette chamber, and that's where I'm going to start putting this back together. I've got to line up the holes here and get those 2 raised head screws in place. I'm only doing those screws up lightly because I've got to come back and put the other screws in place, and it doesn't pay to tighten things up until all the screws are in place. Otherwise it's very difficult to get stuff to line up. Alright, with the struts fully extended, there's a spacer washer that needs to slide in top and bottom in these positions between the body and the bracket. I'll do the one at the bottom first. Just drop that in, lift the bracket with the tip of my tweezers, line up the hole and put the screw in place. I'm just looking at that to see if my choice of screw is appropriate, that it wasn't too short. It appears fine. I don't want them sticking out through the bracket where they can catch on things, but I need them to go all the way through the bracket so that everything will be held in place. Now that one, my washer has moved along here too far. I've got to push that back into place which is probably easier said than done. And it's pretty much in place, I can see it now. And put the last of the 4 screws in place there. Right, with the 4 screws in place, I can now go around and do all of them up tight. That's our struts back in the body, all nice and firm. I need to do my focus mount. This lot's all clean, so everything here has been cleaned, so it's ready to go. This one's correctly aligned. I've got the inner and outer sitting level with each other. My alignment marks are scribed straight across there, so I know that that's sitting in the correct position. And it means this is ready to be lubricated. I'll be using some helical grease, Helimax XP, optical and instrument grease. So I'll back this most of the way out and wipe some grease on in about 5 or 6 spots around the outside. You don't need to be over generous because there's no great advantage in filling the threads up completely with grease. All it'll do is make the helical unusually stiff. I'm working that backwards and forwards, making sure that that works nice and smoothly. All appears good. So I'll just put a little bit of grease around the outside outer helical where it's going to sit in the mount, and in the slots where it runs on the guide posts. I'll give that a wipe too. Now there's no special reason you need to use the helical grease to do this. Any grease would do the job, but I have the helical grease in my hand, so that being the case, it's ideal. Right, lining up these slots. Where's my marks? I think it'll be somewhere there. I'll just check my focus scale ring. Yes, that looks correct. I had the 2 marks towards the bottom, and I'll just check that that moves smoothly, and it does. So I'm going to apply a bit of grease to the retainer plate. Where it bears on that outer helical. It doesn't require much. And then that sits on the mount like that. Now making sure the inner helical is proud, sticking out forward of the outer helical, otherwise you'll be in for grief. I'll put the 6 small screws in place that hold this together. There are 10 screws that all look very much the same. You want 4 good ones to use on your focus scale ring, particularly if it showed any sign of damage before you disassembled the camera. Sometimes if the focus helical is absolutely stuck with dried out grease and the focus scale ring is forced, it will come off the heads of the screws. The focus scale ring will be damaged, the screws will pull past the edge of it, and in that case the screw heads are inevitably damaged and are not particularly useful at holding things back in place, but they'll do a fine job holding this retaining ring in place. So you can use ugly screws on the retaining ring. You want good screws on the focus scale ring. I don't think we had a problem with this one, so I can just grab the screws as they come out of the container. Check that it moves freely still, and that's good. That can go on the camera. I'll bring the camera body back. This only goes up one way. These notches here are where the levers on the back of these buttons drop into to stop you from being able to close the front when it's not set to infinity, which is another point to bear in mind. With these cameras, as with most retinas, you must return the focus scale to infinity before you attempt to close the front of the camera. Can you close the camera with it set somewhere else? Yeah, if you push hard enough you probably can, but it's not going to have a good result. See if I can get these 4 screws in place. Yeah, I've got one to pick up. Now another one. Yeah, these screws are sometimes loose. When they're loose, you'll find that the shutter is loose on the front of the camera for no apparent reason, and potentially at least you're not going to get correct focus. Alright, so they're all in place. I'm just going to collapse this front down and do those 4 screws up tight. Pull the struts back up, and here's my focus scale ring. And I have cleaned this, though you might not believe it. It doesn't look as pretty as it might. Get this in place. I've got my alignment marks here. You can usually see little indentations where the screw heads bit into that focus scale ring, and I can certainly see them here, and they fall exactly where I'd expect them to fall. So it means that my focus scale ring had almost certainly not shifted because of dried out grease, and my alignment marks are therefore in the right place. Of course, I'll check the focus once I've got the camera fully assembled and make sure that everything is good. I'll get all 4 screws in position before I tighten them up. Now these screws just need to be nipped up. You don't need to overdo it. If you overdo it, all you'll end up doing is damaging the screws, possibly distorting the outer helical, and the focus won't move smoothly. This focus moves nice and smoothly there. That's good. When the shutter's not present in the camera, you may well find that this comes back up under spring tension and rubs on here. You might find that you've got a funny rubbing feeling or a rubbing noise and you wonder what it is. It's this, and once everything's back in the camera that won't be a problem. Okay, well I've got to put the door on the front of the camera next. Oh no, I don't. I'm getting ahead of myself. I've got to put the screws in for the to hold the bellows at the back of the front standard. So let's see if I can do this. I'm not sure whether I can. Yeah, I can. If I collapse the lot, that's back in the infinity position. Collapse the lot, I can get at the three of the 4 screw holes through the focus scale ring. And the 4th one I'll pick up with the front extended. But 3 of the screws will be more than sufficient to hold the bellows to the back of the front standard to start off with. So I'll just run those down, tighten them, pull the front back out, move my focus scale ring to expose the 4th hole and get the 4th screw in position. If I'd been doing the job properly, I would have just put those 4 screws in before I put the focus scale ring on for convenience. Now I can do those 4 screws up. And our bellows are back on and attached, everything good. So the door. Okay, the door's here all ready to go. I'll put a bit of grease on the pins top and bottom here on those arms. You don't need to go overboard with that. Hook it in at the top slot. Stretch the door out, hook it over at the bottom slot. Now we're faced with this spring here. I need to get this tucked in down inside the body. That one went without a murmur. Be nice if they all went like that. They don't. Sometimes you've got to sort of guide them into position using a rule or something behind it so that the spring can't gouge the body as it goes. Now I've got to get my hinge pin screws in position. One at the top, one at the bottom. Lining up the holes is sometimes entertaining. Sometimes it's easier with the front partially collapsed. Yep, that's, I can see what I'm doing. I'll tighten that screw up. And the front pulls up nicely into position. With this back at the infinity position, the front opens and closes and it pops. So I have no problem opening it. It certainly didn't pop when the camera arrived. In fact, it wasn't looking very happy. Okay, so the front's done. I can turn my attention to the other major components, the film advance, tripod socket, things like that. The base of the camera, our tripod socket can go back in place. The tripod socket, from memory, wasn't particularly loose on this camera, so there's probably no benefit at all in removing it and cleaning it. I'll do those 3 screws up tight. That screw doesn't, it's the shape of the head's causing me grief there. The countersink doesn't run quite as neatly as it might. Let me find a different screw to pop there. That one. And that's just important to make sure that it sits, the leather sits down neatly over there. Well, that's good. Well, the leather could go back on there at that stage, but I don't think I'll bother. I think I'll carry on up here. the film advance. You need to get the take-up spool back in here, and that I'll run some synthetic grease on the post and on the spring. Then hook my take-up spool in place. Close the back of the camera and fit the film advance shaft. Now the take-up spool's got a slot on one end and a round hole on the other. Round hole down, slot up. Otherwise things won't go together nicely. Bit of synthetic grease through the bush here. Just check that moves smoothly. That appears good. And I've got to revolve this until it picks up the slot in the top of the take-up spool, which is right there. Three screws hold this in position. I can't say those screws line up particularly well, which is why it's always useful to get all the screws started before you tighten anything up. That's better. Check that revolves smoothly. That's good.